Hello and welcome to On Air with Owen. Me, Owen Richards, founder and CEO of Air Marketing, your go-to for outsourced B2B sales and marketing, and my new co-host, fellow business owner and great friend, Neil Finnie.
Hey everyone, Neil Finnie here, founder of the Generator Work Hub, a co-working space here in the beautiful Exeter, and also Next Gen Careers, a professional development program nurturing the talents of tomorrow.
Each week, we'll be diving into the everyday truths around running your own business. And trust me, we're not sugarcoating anything. It's all about the highs, the lows, and everything between when you run your own business as a founder.
Expect candid conversations and valuable insights between the two of us. Plus, we'll be joined by some special guests along the way.
So, time to sit back and tune in to this week's honest conversation. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of On Air with me, Owen Richards, and my wonderful co-host, Mr. Neil. I need to get one of those like wrinkles, Mr. Neil Finnie. You need a nickname.
The recording uses the same one every time.
Neil Finstigator Finnie. Oh no, we need something better than that. What do we need?
No, the Finstigator's fine, but I just don't do it anymore. I don't organise things. I'm not very often anyway.
I feel like, like a boxer, you need like Neil the hitman Finnie. I don't think you're a hitman, but something maybe something nice and endearing.
And Neil Nice Finnie.
Neil the nice man Finnie. God, this has gone the wrong way already. How are you, mate?
Yeah, good. Recovering after a weekend away in Glasgow for a wedding, seeing all the family. Back to the made in Scotland home, which was good. Yeah, British, not Scottish, British. But cool. It's lovely. Like, I don't see the family that often, so a wedding is always a good time to bring everyone together. And it's nice taking the girls up because they don't spend much time there. And it's like, well, look, this is part of who you are as well. So yeah, it was good. How about you? How was your run?
Good. So I've been in Italy running the Amalfi Coast, which is beautiful. So ran from Sorrento, which flew into Naples, got the ferry down to Sorrento. And spent across 3 days, ran from Sorrento all the way around the coast to Amalfi, which was stunning, absolutely stunning. Beautiful coastline, obviously lovely little beaches and little coves and things that you run in, have a swim in the middle of a run and all those sorts of things. A lot of ascent, a lot of climb up the sides of mountains and that sort of stuff. But also
no injuries.
No injury. I mean, I went with a bit of a hamstring injury, a bit of hammy tightness. I probably shouldn't have done it, but not one to miss out. But actually, I think the climbing probably strengthened them and helped with the recovery in some ways. So, it was a bit burning the candle. Burning the candle at both ends. I had a few beers in the evening, running. I definitely just made the most of it, I suppose. But phone off. Emails off, deleted my emails from my phone, deleted LinkedIn from my phone, deleted my emails from my phone so much that I can't get them back on my phone. Technically, there's something going on, which is quite nice. And maybe I'll leave them off, don't know.
And no issues that you've come back to. Everyone, it's all running smoothly. See?
Yeah, I mean, it was only It was only Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So I was in the business Tuesday. I was back in the UK on Monday, albeit not officially at work, but I was available, picking up emails and just catching up a little bit. But what was amazing, and I speculate that some of this is because I'm not sending emails, was I had a lot of emails in my inbox, like 300-400 something, and another couple hundred in my junk, which you automatically got deleted anyway. But from the 300 or 400 that were in my actual inbox, it's probably only 10 to 15 that needed a reply, that actually needed anything. Others were delete because it's rubbish, or you've been CC'd into a thread and you've ended up with 8 emails in the same thread and you only need one of them, and then you read it and you go, right, I know what's happened there. I don't need to reply. I don't need to do anything. So that was really refreshing. I was expecting to come back into this really big workload. And it's been quite the opposite. So yeah, nice. Only 3 days though. So,
Was it? A rest is as good as a holiday, isn't that what I say? So even if it's 3 days, that's still nice. Still a nice break. I must admit, like September, I started the month super refreshed after taking August off. And I had this big vision of being able to just get stuck in St. Nou, but you just get dragged back into things, don't you? So what are we? It's the 19th of September. You know, we've gone over halfway. End of next week, it's like, oh, so maybe I'll be able to start stuff in October. Always getting dragged into things. So what are we talking about, Owen? What are we talking about?
Well, so today I want to talk about, and I want to get your take on this actually. I think it's a really interesting topic around business partnerships, going into business with a business partner. How do you structure shareholding? How do you decide on who has what, and what's the process for getting there? Because I think you and I have both been through that. I've been through it a few times. Sometimes I got it right, sometimes I got it wrong, and I've learned along the way. Some things that I recommend as standard to people, and there's some things that I recommend to avoid as standard to people. But it's amazing how many people go into that with their eyes closed and just don't know any different because they've never done it before. And I think if you're sitting there thinking about starting a business with somebody, whether they are friend, family, or somebody you're just going to bring in as a co-founder, I think this conversation could be a really critical learning for people. So yeah, if you're all right, that's what I want to dig into.
Let's do it. Let's do it. It's a nightmare, if I'm honest. Like I'm probably not the best person to give advice on this because my structures in terms of the business are always, I don't know, not tenuous, but complex. And I think I rush into things. So probably I could use taking some of my own advice and some of your advice as well.
But I think it's about learnings, right? So sometimes you haven't done it well, but you are able to offload the learning from that, having not done it well. And I think that's as useful as anything. Let's maybe set the lie of the land first. So for you, maybe give one or two examples. I know you've got a few businesses. What are the share structures? Well, obviously, you don't need to go into names and details, but what are the share structures, or how many people are involved?
So the generator is super simple. So there's 4 of us, Jim and his wife Emma, and Liz and I. Everyone's got 25%. That was a bit of a strange one because the generator, in its kind of birth at the beginning, was never meant to be a business. It was kind of a side product of another business that we took on more space, and it kind of organically happened. And when it started to grow and it started to get bigger, I think I didn't have the bandwidth to be able to really focus on it on my own. I was like, I don't really want to do this on my own. Wow. And at that time, we had a current member, Jim, that was renting space from us. And he'd always said to me, you know, when he started using the space, that he would love to, you know, create a co-work space. That was one of his visions and plans. And when we looked at taking more space down at the Quay, he could see I was a bit nervous about it in terms of, I don't know if I want to do this all on my own. It's a bit of a commitment. It's a bit of a risk. And he's like, well, how about I get involved? And because I think it was maybe 2 years old. It wasn't that old. And he has a very successful business. I thought, well, actually, this is a learning curve for me as well. So, you know, it was pretty much, look, come on board. I'll give you 50%. We're at 50% between the families, and we'll just grow it together. It was very obvious that he was bringing a different skill set to what I have. And I think I bring a slightly different skill set to him as well. And it's been great because I think Jim and I are very similar in terms of how we approach, how we work. And we've had, you know, not huge, like I think we've maybe had crosswords twice in like 6-7 years, and it's not even really massively crosswords. I think it's one of us getting grumpy with the other one. So most of the time we have a good relationship. Corkscrew, this is the complex bit. So Andrea, my business partner in Corkscrew, he has another business in Barcelona that we set up through Brexit, because we needed to access some EU funding, and obviously we couldn't do that with having a UK company. So we set up Barcelona to allow us to receive into Barcelona. And Andrea and I, we'd known each other, you know, a long time, but we hadn't worked together that long. And we said, look, let's just set it up and we'll send people to you, and we'll sort out the kind of agreements at a later stage. But we didn't. And it became very expensive for me to get shares in the business in Barcelona, because the business was showing a nice profit. You know, it was doing well, and you can't just give me shares. I have to buy the shares, or, you know, and it became price prohibitive. So in that manner, we both have our own entities. He has the entity in Barcelona. I have the entity in the UK. And the way that we work is we ensure that monies in each of the businesses is about the same. So, no one's holding any more money than the other person. So
you would build a Barcelona business to flatten things out,
and vice versa. So, it worked really well. And again, Andrea and I get on really well. We're very similar. I think our skill sets are probably too alike. We're very similar in terms of how we approach the business and the skill sets that we have. But it works really well because I think we're honest and open with each other. We've never had an issue there with that business. But when I speak to my accountant, they're like, well, he could just, close the business and run off the money. So, so could I.
Yeah.
We've both got that. The complexity comes into it if one of us dies, because Liz would inherit the shares and his wife Julie would inherit the shares, and then you get really kind of complex issues. But again, realistically, if that happened, I think we would have foresight of that, and there's finances split between the two businesses, that it wouldn't be a huge issue. The third company, Career Habit Pro, there's 3 of us involved with that.
Getting more complex. It's going further and further.
Yeah. And the 3 of us get on well, but we're actually at a stage now, and like being completely transparent, where the structure's changing a little bit, and it's quite complex because there's not really any money coming into the business. We can see money, coming in 12, 18 months, 2 years down the line. It will be something that grows organically, but there's no money in the business for anyone to get paid. So it's like, okay, so we've all got to give time pro bono in making this work. And like, I don't know if Andrea wants to do that. I don't know if Alba wants to do that. Andrea might say, well, I don't want to work, but I still want to hold my shares. And I'd be like, well, if I'm working, why should you benefit from the growth of the business? It started to become complex, and we don't have a shareholders agreement or anything like that in place. It's just like we've all got equal equity. So if one of us decides they don't want to do anything, they still have shares. And it's only what's the business? It's like 12 months old, so it's not. I think we were going to put shareholder agreements into place, and we'd spoken to a lawyer in Barcelona about bringing it all together. But I think the complexities and other bits and pieces, and the cost as well for a startup and bringing someone in to sort all of this out, it's like, oh, do we need this? We will trust each other. It'll be fine. We'll work it out. And I think we will work it out, but it's difficult. So Career Habit Pro is the one I'm struggling with at the moment. Corkscrew and the generator is all fine. That until we have an argument or a falling out, and then who knows what happens.
Well, this is it. It's you don't know what you don't know, and things are fine today. But you said it. Oh, if somebody were to die, we'd have foresight. Would you? Because there's always a scenario where somebody gets hit by a bus. That's always the word that gets used in business, isn't it? And things happen, and it's like having an insurance policy. It'd be fine until it happens.
Yeah, I think it's not necessarily foresight. I think the mechanics that are in there at the moment, it would be fine because, as I say, there's equal money. The partnerships that we work with would be able to navigate that in taking some of the businesses and placing them somewhere else. So I think it would be okay. I think if we only had Barcelona and we didn't have Corkscrew, we didn't have any money in the business, and I didn't have any say on that, then it becomes harder. Because if it was 50-50 in the Barcelona company and that's all we had, if something happened to Andreu and the shares were passed to Julie, then it could become complex because it's the same business that we're involved with. And exactly the same if Andreu and I had 50-50 in the UK company. If I died and half went to Liz, it would become more complex. It becomes, I guess, a little bit more complex at the generator. If something happened to Jim, Emma gets the shares. And what does she want to do with 50% of the business? And then things, we haven't got anything in place. You have for that though, haven't you?
Yeah. So the reason I brought this is it's not perfect, but it's actually with Air is something I'm really proud of, the way that Richard and I dealt with it. So for transparency's sake, I own a 70% shareholding. Richard owns a 30% shareholder with 2 shareholders. there was a very clear documentation process before we started around a number of things. What do people have to do as part of their share, as being a shareholder and a director of the company? So we are both. And we clearly outlined that. So I have to be working within the business. That's my job to do that. And Richard has some responsibilities, like it's still written in his contract that he has to visit us in the UK. He's based in Australia once a year. He does it more than that quite regularly, but that's through choice. And then we also have built in the what happens if people don't do what they're supposed to do, or what happens if a number of scenarios occur. So I remember these conversations in 2015, being really tricky. They were really tricky conversations because we had to talk about, well, what happens if you die or I die? And the whole spouse thing is really interesting because I've chosen to go into business with Richard. He's chosen to go into business with me. I haven't chosen to go into business with his wife, Shaz, and Rich hasn't chosen to go into business with Amy. They definitely haven't chosen to go into business together. So if something were to happen to me, Amy would suddenly be the majority shareholder in the business that Richard's been involved with for 8.5 years, and she would be entitled to make decisions on what happened with that business, and that really affects the other party or parties. So we decided to not take standard articles and standard shareholder agreement, and we really worked hard on drafting our own to the point where, and I haven't looked at it for several years, which is a good thing, right? You shouldn't need to look at it again, but I'm confident I could go back to that document and say, right, if one of us goes to prison and can't perform our role as a shareholder, there's a mechanism for that. If one of us wants to sell the business, we cannot sell to a third party without offering the shares at market value to the other shareholder. So I couldn't go and sell my shares without offering them to Richard first. And he can decline them, but I can't therefore bring a third party he doesn't want to work in without him having the rights to buy the business, or to use the business as a mechanism to buy my shares. So the business buys my shares, and they're only 30% of the shares, and they're all owned by Richard, and he is therefore 100% shareholder. There's a mechanism for if somebody goes AWOL. So if you genuinely just can't get hold of each other, and you go off the face of the earth, like just don't want to be involved anymore, walk away. There's a mechanism for all of these things in place. And things like it, again, if let's use Richard, if Richard were to pass away, his wife would not be able to take the shares. She would be forced to sell the shares. Those shares would, as a first port of call, be offered to me as the other shareholder. Second port of call, they'd be offered to the business. So if I could afford to buy them, I would buy them at market rate. They're independently valued. If the business could afford, if I couldn't or I didn't want to, the business could afford to buy them, then the business could bubuy those shares. So it effectively absorbs those shares back within, and there are only 70 instead of 30 shares, or 700 instead of 300. And Shaz would get market rate valuation paid out to her at that point in time, and it would avoid a scenario where people are stuck in business should they not want to. Now we can overwrite that with mutual agreement. We go, actually no, stay in. We want to keep it, and she might say, I'm going to stay silent and let you run it, but I would like to stay involved. Fine, absolutely fine. I don't want to cash out yet. That's fine. But there's lots of ways out for people in the meantime, and I'm really proud of that, even though we've never had to use.
So, question for you: you brought in expert advice. You brought a lawyer in to go and pull this together. How much did it cost?
Yeah, it cost us £6,000.
Yeah, this is the thing, and I think this is the thing that a lot of small businesses, especially startups as well, 6 to 10,000 on putting this stuff together. A lot of people are like, well, one, maybe we don't have that money. Number two, that money is better spent on marketing or other things in the business.
Yeah.
So I think there's like maybe ChatGPT is, Gemini, and
and
do that now. And I think, but when I launched businesses before that wasn't available, and you were looking at 6 to 10,000 to make sure things were set up in the right way. Now you might argue, well, that would save you money further down the line, but as a startup, as a new business, it's like you don't have that spare capital, that spare cash to be able to pull those things together. And I think it seems like one of those things that should be more supported, maybe from government, local government,
but it is.
Or
business
support, but not financially.
Yeah, it is. So Yeah, it is. So things like Seed Legals is a good example, and there are other suppliers out there. You know, they're not sponsoring us. Okay. Maybe they should. You can
Seed
go on and pay.
Next episode.
There you go. I think it's like 600-800 quid, and they give you templates for this stuff. But what's interesting, those templates, is it will say define a bad user. Here are circumstances where you want to bad lever, good lever, mutual lever. You know, and it gives you those. Whereas, you know, pre-technology, I mean, you've got to remember we were setting this up before this kind of, you know, so these sorts of tech platforms were the norm. Your only way was to go to a traditional solicitor. I didn't know any better. Richard and I hadn't done it before. Whereas now I would go to my network and go, has anyone done this before? And somebody would probably give me a template that I can work with. And then I might go to a lawyer and say, can you just check there's nothing in there that's dramatic? It might cost me $1,000, which is money well spent. So I think we did it on the more expensive side. Because
why did you do it?
Because
had Richard been burnt before, or had you had a bad experience?
No,
before?
I think just, do you know what, we'd worked together for 8 years. It was we knew each other really well. We were comfortable having difficult conversations because we'd done that a lot. And I think we're both of the ilk, if we're going to do it, we're going to do it properly. Yeah, I think I probably had confidence I would make it work as well. So I didn't mind investing the money to do it well. I was backing myself at that point in time. Richard, maybe personality-wise, is far more conservative, a bit more cautious, a bit more, and that's why we work well together, because we come from different sides a lot of the time. So I think he definitely wanted to protect. Bear in mind, he was putting a little bit of money in as well. So he was giving us access to technology and software that they had in Australia for free. He was taking a bit of a risk. There was a loan going into the business, so he wanted to protect that money as well. So there was a small loan that went into the business that he put in that was paid back, that he had a charge against. So if the business went into administration and paid anyone, it would have to pay him first, or pay back that loan first. So there's lots of reasons, but I think more than anything, it felt like the right thing to do. It felt like the default thing you needed to do was to get shareholder agreements. And as part of those discussions, you suddenly go, oh, what if? And once you start that process, you realize there are a lot of what ifs.
Why do so many people not do it then? Because, okay, we've mentioned the financial aspects, but as you said, you know, you've got Seed Legals, or nowadays you use, I know, ChatGPT to kind of support you there. But we still find, I think in the last 6 months, I've maybe spoke to 3 or 4 business owners that are having a nightmare with their partners and other shareholders. It just being an absolute nightmare. So
and there's always two sides.
Not?
And there's always 2 sides to every story, right? And I think that's important, and that's exactly the reason. Because if you think about it, you go into, you know, if you meet a new boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever, you go into that with rose-tinted glasses, don't you? You don't start your relationship by saying, we're probably going to break up. You start your relationship by going, I really like you, this is working well, let's spend more time together. And I think it's the same in business, right? Most people don't work together before they go into business, or they do, but in a completely different capacity for a short period of time. Whereas, so I think the advantage that Richard and I had is we had nearly a decade of working together under our belts, albeit as an employer and employee, but the relationship never felt like that. It was always professional, collaborative. You know, I felt like a business partner already. In his business in Australia, and we were very closely running that business together. So not much changed in real terms. I knew that we could fight and get over it. I knew that we could have different opinions and work through that together and come up with a sensible compromise or a sensible solution. Whereas people going into business for the first time together, they've not exposed themselves to that a lot of the time.
Who said that? Did we not speak to someone that said about the best thing to do is have an early fight with
have a fight? Yeah, I think it was Will. Brody, one of our guests.
Will.
Yeah. Because he had a scenario where I remember he was pretty damning about his co-founder, and that was a scenario where they had worked together in a previous business as employees, as peers, doing a job together next to each other. Will started a company, like you, wanted a co-founder, got to a certain point when actually it'd be really good to have somebody else with a different skill set to bounce off, to challenge, and that fell apart for a number of reasons that he shared with us on a previous episode. If you haven't listened to it, go and listen to it. Well worth it. But the interesting thing there is that it cost him, I mean, it broke the business or contributed towards it. And I honestly think, you know, you just have to expect it's going to end, because it is. Like it or lump it, at some point, The best case is that one of you gets old and dies and you still got the business, or that you sell it for a lot of money and there's one of you needs to stay in the business. And the worst case is that something awful happens soon after you've set it up or whatever. And people just don't want to have those conversations. They don't think about it because they think, oh, this is going to be great. We're going to make loads of money. We're going to be millionaires. It won't matter. What if it doesn't look like that? And what if you fall out? And what if you want different things? What if one of your lives changes so much that you need cash out of the business and you need to balance that? There's all this stuff. And my final point before I shut up for a minute is that this is where I always say to people, don't do equal shareholdings. That's not to say, by all means, put the caveats in that allow the sort of exits and the changes and plan on that kind of stuff. But if you can't do that, I think you need a majority shareholder. And that can be 51-49. Financially, that doesn't make a significant difference. But
does that make it? That doesn't make a difference legally, though, does it? I don't think.
It makes a difference from a voting share. If your shares have voting.
I thought it had to be more. I thought it was a bigger majority. I
think it's 70%. But the point is that if it came to shareholding, voting, making key decisions across the business, you can change this in your shareholding, right? So you can say we need 80% of shareholders or 90% in order to execute on a strategic change. But in the day-to-day stuff, you've got somebody who is the majority shareholder. And I think I'm not saying 51-49 is the right answer, but I've always said our 70-30 works really well because I'm in the business running it every day. Richard really gave us that start.
Yeah, but that makes sense for you in that relationship. Let's say Jim and I. Let's forget about Liz and Emma for the moment. Where do you make that decision? We're both in the business. We both take an equal responsibility. As of yet, we haven't had a big disagreement on anything for the business. But then someone can put their foot down and say, well, actually, I'm the majority share. How do you decide that? And like for Andrea and I, it's slightly different. But I think having that individual with two people can be really difficult. And even the situation with Albert and Andrea and I, there's going to be three of us. And just to highlight as well, we have a conversation next week about how we do this. And I think retrospectively, even though it's a year later, it is about working through a shareholders agreement. And that's all being open and honest about what needs to be in there to protect yourselves. Because this is something that you can do retrospectively. It doesn't have to be done at the beginning. You can do it at later stages and make sure that you've got everything in place. Makes it easier at the beginning because then no goalposts are moving or anything else. But that then becomes complex. Someone or two people have got to be willing to take a step back and go, okay, we will give that responsibility.
Look at it a different way. So let me take you and Jim as an example. Jim wanted to be involved, right? He wanted to be involved and could add value. He didn't say, I want 50% of the business. He went, I'd like to come in, I'd like to get involved. If you'd have said, great, I'd really like you involved too. What could you give where I could give you 30% of the business or a third of the business? What would you be able to give for that third? And if you were to say, what I don't want to do is give up half of the business because blood, sweat and tears, got it to this stage, but I would really like the input. Jim could arguably have put less in or, maybe not be as responsible as you, but still be on that journey and contributing to that journey. And you'd have the cleanliness of a majority shareholder.
I get that as someone coming into a business. You got 2 years track record or whatever they come into the business. The interesting thing is, I would be willing to allow Jim to be that majority shareholder because I feel that I would, not that I would submit. Submit to Jim. You'd love that. But I think in many respects, I think the skill sets that he has made the business far more successful than I'd been alone. And I fully believe that. I really do. We both have our different skill sets, but I think he's allowed us to grow to that kind of next step. I would be willing. Jim, I'm not giving you any more equity.
Yeah, just to be clear.
But I think it doesn't always have to be in that way. I think you could be the founder, but you can also understand that someone is maybe better in place to make decisions than you are. and would be better for the business.
Look at it a different way. You don't do the same job, right? So you don't follow each other around doing the same things exactly the same all the time. You look after certain things. He looks after because those are your skill sets. Somebody has to be the CEO, right? Somebody has to be the finance person. Somebody has to be the relationship and client services person, and so on. It's no different with shareholding, right? It's exactly the same. As you don't start a business and walk in and go, well, let's just do everything together. Things don't have to be the same. And I think when they're not, when it's clearly defined who does what, when you go in 50-50, and maybe these things are interlinked, and maybe it's not just the percentage, and it's all tied in together, that I think too many people start, there's two of them that have a great idea, or one has a great idea and brings another one in, and they go, right, 50-50, everything, and then they just start. And all of a sudden they're working through, well, who does what, and how does this work, and where do we go, and how on earth do we make a decision? Who owns that decision? And actually, in a good business, regardless of shareholding, if you're the finance director, you should be making finance decisions, not operational ones. If you're the ops director, you should be making ops decisions and not financial ones, right? We stay in our lane, and we are hired because we're good at that part of running the business, and those good parts, and you collaborate and you share and you get second opinions, but you make that call. That's where you should be sitting. And I think it's about, probably defining that stuff up front as well, because that will help you to understand whether actually, if somebody is going to be the CEO and the finance director and the CMO, and you're going to be the customer service director, probably they're going to take on a lot more weight than you, and you're going to need them to be, successful for this to work far more than you are you. So actually, not being 50-50 would make sense, because you probably have a better chance of success if you're not than if you are, because at some point it's going to be that person's going to realize, I'm putting a hell of a lot in right now. I'm really relied upon. I'm invaluable. And I'm doing the leg, and I've only got 50% of the business. And that can be a reason for people to walk, or to hire another person, or whatever it might be. So I just think it's so complex, isn't it? But I think,
well, this is it. And I think this is why I think getting it, and it can change, but at the beginning, putting those systems into place and make sure it works. What happens when it goes wrong? How do you navigate that? Because as I said, Will spoke about it. We've got other people that have spoken about it.
Yeah.
Mediators.
Well,
do you and it impacts. It's not just impacting your business. It can impact you and your mental health and who you are as an individual. It can be really damaging.
Because you think, this person and I, we get along really well. So if it goes wrong, we'll deal with it because we're really good mates and we've worked well together. But guess what? When it goes wrong and you fall out, you've fallen out. You're no longer mates. That doesn't look like that. It's like, same reason divorce lawyers make so much money, right? Because nobody thinks they're going to be in that situation, and they are, and they realize that they can't communicate the same way as they used to. And then all of a sudden it's really tricky to get through, and you have to get somebody independent. And of course that costs money. I think the answer is, so the short answer is I don't know, because I've never been in that situation. Thankfully, I've had some breakdown pre-going into shareholding agreement. So some concepts, some startups that I was involved in where we've tested working together. And that's another really important thing. I've done that twice, actually 3 times, where I've tested working with somebody that I've not worked with before on a business idea. And typically I've taken a consultancy role within that business for a temporary period of time. We've worked together. Once was the other way around, where they were involved in our businesses as a consultancy role to potentially come in as a shareholder. And on all 3 occasions, something fell over. On one of those occasions, I decided it wasn't right. It didn't feel right for us and for me. On another of those occasions, the plan changed entirely. And on another of those occasions, somebody did the wrong thing by me. And all of those are 3 completely different reasons, where somebody got a bit greedy a bit early. And that was a really good reason for me to be out. And I hadn't signed anything at that point. So that was brilliant. So I found out that person couldn't be trusted before we got into it formally. Whereas another one was amicable. We shook hands. There was money exchange for time and input, and we agreed it wasn't the right thing to do at that point in time. We could have, in all 3 of those, got into shareholding agreement, invested that $6,000 and failed. So I think probably doing something beforehand and testing makes a lot of sense. The second is, document. If you are going to get into shareholding, make sure in your shareholding you've got what happens if written in there, because then mediation is not necessary, because it's in a legal document that you signed, right?
Well, this is it, isn't it? That solves all the problem, doesn't it? If it is there at the beginning, you don't have to go that mediation, because you can refer back to the document. But
correct.
Everyone I've spoken to, all the people I've spoken to that have the issues, is because the documentation wasn't there.
Yeah, because they take standard shareholding document off of Companies House articles, all that kind of stuff, and then they go, oh, everything's equal. Everything's got to be negotiated effectively. And you think all of a sudden you've got two people who want completely different things, and nobody's going to compromise far enough to meet in the middle, right? Everyone's going to compromise a bit to show they're compromising. But if the gap is this big and you're only prepared to both go that far, you can't fight. It's impossible. And that's where you end up with people making legal decisions for you, which means you've got court costs and lawyer costs and all the rest of it. And it's impossible to fix it without somebody making a decision, and those people can't make a decision. And that's where it's like, make the decision early when the emotion isn't there, when you're not in that scenario. So Richard and I talked about those things logically because we weren't in the scenario. There was no emotion. You're thinking it through and you're playing it back in your head, but you're not in there. The emotion isn't there that would kind of mask it, like blur your thoughts. Because I wasn't angry because he pissed me off, or I wasn't angry because, I don't know, he wasn't getting involved in the business, wasn't supporting. He wasn't, really, really sad that he lost his business partner, or vice versa, and that I died, or anything like that. None of that was there. So it was just clean, clear thoughts around what would be the logical thing to do that is fair for everybody in this scenario.
Yeah.
And they work both ways. So it's like, if I'm agreeing something, so is he. So it works both ways. And whereas at the moment, if you're negotiating it in the moment, only one of you is in one situation and one of you is in the other. You can't see this from the other's angle.
Yeah. So we've got like Career Habit Pro next week. We've got an interesting conversation because it is the three of us just sitting down and being like, right, what is it going to be? And again, you can't. I don't think you can. I don't know. You can plan some stuff, but not everything. I think initially as well is like, well, the next 12 months, because I think that the first 12, 24 months of a business are critical. They really are. I think after that, if it grows to a certain level, people have, committed for a period of time, you can walk away with that equity or hold on to that equity. I think there's value there. But Richard, does he always have to be involved forever? Like, has he always got to come across? Was that part of the agreement that he's got to do everything? Or
look, I think it's there in the agreement, but like any legal agreement, you can have mutual agreement to change it, right? So technically, yes, while he's a shareholder, he has a responsibility to be at the annual review every year for shareholders, just like any other shareholder would. We've just stipulated that he'll need to be here in person, because for him to have a 30% share in a business and not do anything, not be involved, not have a say, but that was because we were visualizing it from a perspective of I'd never run a business before.
But this is the thing, isn't it? That someone, like, let's say that 30%, someone takes 30%, he's been coming across, he's been supporting and getting it to a level that then is able to grow. Why should he devalue his shares or take a less shares or give up his shares because he's not doing that anymore? Because again, that's where it gets complex. It's like, well, look, I gave sweat, blood and tears for the first 3 years to make sure this was a success. Without me, then it wouldn't have been a success. Oh, you're not coming across anymore. And so again, these are really complex issues as well.
So bear in mind that these clauses are put in place for what's the best thing for the business, right? Because that's the thing we have mutually in common, not the individual. So if him coming over is right for him as an individual, but negative for the business, not coming over, but negative. And I'd argue now it's not, but in the early stages it was. And I think there's probably a time where, you can absolutely let go. I could let go of that clause right now. I love him to come over every single year, and he's coming over 3 times this year, which is brilliant. He's got family here and all that kind of stuff, and that makes me really happy. But I don't expect that every year. And if he didn't come for a year, so he didn't come for 2 years in the depths of COVID because he wasn't allowed to travel here, I'm not going to hold him accountable for that, because it's common sense and logic. So I think logic always prevails, but a legal agreement has to be there to guard the mechanisms and the safety of the business. And for that, if Richard were to no longer be involved, I'm not going to come, I'm not going to be a part of anything. I won't be on the board meeting every month. I'm not going to turn up to that annual thing. There would come a point where you go, well, you're not involved. Absolutely. So yes, you can have your 30%, but if you're not involved, I want to buy those shares, because there's no point in you having them. I'll buy them at today's value, and I'll take the risk for the next.
And so so the mechanics are in place for that. It's like, well, you'll get them bought.
So it gives me the right
value of today, and it gives you the right.
Yeah. So it gives me the right. So if Richard stops being involved in the business, and look, there's involved. So if he goes missing, if he chooses not to come to an annual meeting or dialing virtually, now we're mature enough, that's fine, isn't it? That's not a problem. And that's where common sense prevails. As 2 shareholders, we can make a decision together, and not everything works as per the agreement. But if I wanted to enforce it for a good reason, then maybe you would. But I don't think we'd work well together if we thought like that. So we could technically go and change that, and by mutual consent now, that wouldn't be a problem. But if he were to say, I'm retiring, I'm no longer being involved in work, I'm not going to contribute to air whatsoever, I'm not going to have a work email address, I don't want to look at reports, yada, 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 then at that point, it would force the shares to be offered to me to be bought. Now, I don't have to buy them. I might say, I'm really happy for him to do that. Again, common sense, right? Yeah, I'm really happy for him to do that. He's worked really hard.
Okay, so quick, like question, kind of not a last question, but it's a nice one. What was if he turned up, but you knew he just couldn't be asked? Is there a mechanic in there for that?
Probably.
So I'm turning up. Go on, Owen, give me your best. Boring.
Well,
you know,
do you know
like.
What? So there's two things.
Was it done? They call it like quiet quitting. Bit of quiet quitting from.
Yeah, quiet. Well, look, that he's being damaged from that too, right? So what you got to remember is that culturally, if one of your shareholders is doing that, what impact does that have on the business? And it's his asset. So I'd like to think that you might go into somebody with business in the early stages you've not worked with before, ends up doing that. I've known Richard for nearly 20 years. The chances of him doing that are pretty slim, barring some kind of major personality change. I might claim mental illness and that he has to sell his shares with Rich because it would be so out of character. But the reality is, actually, at this point in time, I'd go, if he did that once, I'd go, fine, it's a bad day. No problem. It happens. It would never happen.
Yeah, but that's it. But I think you're lucky. I think you're lucky in that extent where you've had a lot of time working with Richard beforehand and since. Jim and I knew Jim a couple of years before, maybe, and Joe. Probably longer, but time together minimal because obviously he's Barcelona and I was UK. So you don't know, really. And I'm sure the 3 or 4 people that we've spoken to didn't believe that things were there badly. And again, the mechanics can be put in place, but you can't. I don't think you can put anything in place for someone for some But I suppose what we're saying is to at least put as much in there that the mechanics are in place to allow you to navigate things. Yeah,
exactly. There's you can't plan to the nth degree. It's impossible, right? There's stuff that can happen that nobody would have thought could happen, like COVID. Right? We didn't know that was a thing growing up. Now we do. So probably people put clauses into force majeure that say pandemics, whereas force majeure never used to include pandemics.
Yeah.
So the world moves on, but the point is that at some point your business partnership will end, either by exit, by death, by retirement, by illness, by falling out. Whatever, it will end. And if you have got nothing, you're only asking for trouble. And I think that would be my biggest takeaway. Mr. Finnie, it's been a pleasure as always. Thank you very much. We'll see you on the next episode. And
maybe we could maybe get a lawyer in as well. Some advice.
Well, if you're paying them for their time, no problem.
No. So was it Seed Legal? They're going to come in and sort us out. No problem. All right, buddy. Good to see you.
Cheers. See you later.